Think about the last time you lost your temper. Not the dramatic version, the ordinary one. A comment that landed wrong, a plan that fell apart, someone who said something in a tone that was just slightly off, a message that took too long to arrive, something small, something that, if you described it to someone else later, would sound almost embarrassingly minor. And yet, in that moment, it took everything from you. Your chest tightened. Your thoughts started moving faster than you could manage. You said something you didn't mean, or you stayed quiet and spent the next 3 hours replaying the moment in your head, building the perfect response you never gave. And the worst part? It wasn't even a big thing. That's what makes this so difficult. It's rarely the big things that undo us. It's the small ones. The ones that shouldn't have the power to reach us, but do every single time with a precision that feels almost personal. And most people assume this is just how they are. That some people have patience and some don't. That some people stay calm under pressure and others are simply built differently. That this is a personality trait you either got or you didn't. But that's not true. Calm is not a personality trait. It is a skill. And like every skill, it can be learned, practiced, and built until it becomes the default rather than the exception. What nobody teaches you is this. The moment you think you lost control because of what happened to you, you have already misunderstood the problem. Because between what happens and how you respond, there is always a space, a gap, a moment, however brief, where a choice exists. Most people never find that space. Not because it isn't there, because nobody showed them where to look. That is what this video is about. There is a belief that most people carry without ever examining it. That if something bad happens, feeling bad is just natural. That if someone disrespects you, anger is the only logical response. That if things don't go as planned, frustration is just part of the deal. That the reaction follows the event the way night follows day, automatically, inevitably, without any room for anything in between. And in one sense, that's true. The initial emotional response is often automatic. Your nervous system reacts before your conscious mind has a chance to weigh in. The tightening in your chest, the spike of adrenaline, the flood of thoughts, those aren't things you chose. They happen to you. But what you do with them, that is always a choice. And this is the distinction that changes everything. The calm person is not someone who doesn't feel those things. They feel exactly what you feel. The same frustration, the same irritation, the same surge of emotion when something goes wrong or someone pushes in a direction they don't want to go. The difference is that the calm person has learned to observe that feeling without immediately becoming it. They feel the anger rise. They notice it. And instead of following it automatically down the familiar path of reaction, they pause. They breathe. They ask a question. And that question, however brief, creates the space between the event and the response that most people never find. That space is where your power lives. Let's talk about something that almost nobody explains correctly. Emotions are information. They are not instructions. This is one of the most important things you will ever understand about your own mind. And most people get it backwards their entire lives. When you feel anger, your brain is giving you information. Something happened that violated your expectations, your values, your sense of how things should be. That information is real. It matters. It's telling you something. But anger is not telling you to attack. Fear is not telling you to freeze. Frustration is not telling you to quit. Those are automatic responses built into your nervous system over millions of years of evolution for a world that no longer exists. They are reactions to signals your brain interpreted as threats, and they were useful once in conditions of genuine physical danger. In the situations you face today, they're almost never the right response. The person who feels anger and immediately attacks has confused the message with the instruction. They received the information, bypassed the processing, and went straight to the reaction. And the reaction almost always makes things worse. It escalates, it damages, it produces regret. The calm person receives the same message, feels the same anger, and then does something different with it. They pause. They let the information land without immediately acting on it. They ask, what is this telling me? And what is the most useful thing I can do with that information right now? Not the most satisfying, not the most emotionally driven, the most useful. That question between the feeling and the action is the entire practice of staying calm. Everything else is just a variation of that one move. Here is something that nobody talks about when they talk about staying calm. Most of the time, what you're reacting to is not what actually happened. It is the story you told yourself about what happened. In a fraction of a second between the event and your awareness of it, your mind constructed a narrative. It filled in the blanks. It assigned intention to ambiguous behavior. It connected the current moment to 100 previous moments that felt similar, building a pattern that felt true but may have been entirely invented. Someone sends you a short reply to a long message. Your mind says they're dismissing you. Maybe they were just busy. A colleague doesn't include you in a meeting. Your mind says they're excluding you deliberately. Maybe it was an oversight. Your boss gives you a look. Your mind says they're unhappy with your work. Maybe they just had a difficult morning. None of these stories are facts. They are interpretations. And interpretations, unlike facts, can be examined, questioned, and revised. The calm person has learned to make this distinction. They notice when they are reacting to an interpretation rather than to a fact. They slow down long enough to ask, what actually happened here, separate from the story I'm already telling about it? That question does not make the difficulty disappear, but it reduces the emotional charge significantly because most of the charge was never about the event. It was about the meaning your mind assigned to the event in the first place. And the meaning, unlike the event, is something you have genuine influence over. Let's talk about something that most people misunderstand about composure under pressure. They think staying calm means not caring. That if something genuinely matters to you, the emotional reaction is proof of that maturity. That the person who doesn't visibly react must not be fully invested. But that's exactly backwards. The person who reacts most intensely to every difficulty is not the most invested. They are the most controlled by their circumstances. Every fluctuation in the external world produces a corresponding fluctuation in their internal state. They are not leading the situation. The situation is leading them. The calm person is not less invested. They are differently invested. They have separated their commitment to the outcome from their emotional dependence on each individual moment going the way they want it to go. They can care deeply about the result while remaining steady about the process. They can be fully present in a difficult conversation without being destabilized by it. That separation is not detachment. It is discipline. And it is one of the rarest and most valuable qualities a person can develop. Because when you are steady, you think more clearly. When you think more clearly, you make better decisions. When you make better decisions under pressure, your outcomes improve. Not occasionally, not when you get lucky, but consistently over time in a way that compounds into a life that looks fundamentally different from the life of someone who is constantly at the mercy of their own reactions. The calm person also affects everyone around them. This is something that rarely gets discussed. Your emotional state is not private. It radiates. The people around you, in your home, in your workplace, in every environment you inhabit, absorb it. They respond to it. They are elevated by it or dragged down by it, often without realizing that is what is happening. When you lose control, you give others permission to lose control. When you escalate, you invite escalation. When you react from full emotional charge, You turn every interaction into something that requires managing rather than something that produces results. But when you stay calm, something different happens. The room adjusts to you. The conversation finds a lower temperature. The person across from you, who is bracing for conflict, finds that the conflict they were preparing for never arrived. And in that unexpected steadiness, something becomes possible that the heated version of the interaction never could have produced. That is not an accident. That is the natural effect of a regulated nervous system in an unregulated environment. You become the anchor, and anchors do not follow the current. They set the position that everything else orients around. Let's talk about silence, because it is one of the most underused tools in every difficult situation. Most people, when they feel emotional pressure, fill the space with words. They explain themselves, defend their position, respond immediately to every challenge, match the energy of whoever is pushing against them. They talk because silence feels like weakness, like giving ground, like losing. But silence is not weakness. Silence is the space in which your best thinking happens. When you stay quiet in a heated moment, you are not conceding. You are refusing to let the urgency of someone else's emotion dictate the quality of your response. You are creating the pause that the automatic reaction never allows. You are gathering information instead of transmitting reaction. And what happens to the person across from you when you don't respond immediately? They have to sit with their own energy. They expected a reaction and didn't get one. They pushed and found no corresponding push in return. That experience is profoundly disorienting for someone who is operating from emotional charge, because they were counting on the reaction to sustain the escalation. Without it, the escalation has nothing to feed on. Your silence told them, without a single word, that whatever they said did not reach you deeply enough to require an immediate response. And that, paradoxically, communicates more strength than any argument you could have made. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means you speak when you have something worth saying from a state of mind that is worth speaking from. Not from the height of the reactive moment, but from a steadiness that follows it. The person who waits for that steadiness before responding consistently says things they don't regret. The person who responds immediately from the peak of the emotional charge almost never does. Now let's talk about what you can control and what you cannot, because this distinction is the foundation of everything. You cannot control what other people say. You cannot control how they say it. You cannot control whether plans work out the way you design them, whether the day unfolds the way you expected, whether the world cooperates with what you need it to do. You cannot control any of that. What you can control is your attitude toward it, your tone in the conversation that follows, your next decision, the quality of the response you choose to give. That's it. Those are the boundaries of your actual influence. And here is the exhausting thing that most people do instead. They spend enormous amounts of energy trying to control what they cannot and almost no energy on what they can. They fight against the unchangeable. They resist the inevitable. They try to manage other people's behavior, other people's reactions, other people's perceptions, none of which are ever fully available to them. And that fight, relentless and unwinnable, is what drains them, not the circumstances themselves. The resistance to the circumstances. The moment you genuinely accept that your power stops at the edge of your own response, something releases. Not because the problem goes away, because you stop spending your energy on what was never yours to manage and start putting it entirely where it can actually do something. That redirection is not surrender. It is precision. It is directing the limited resource of your attention and energy toward the things where it actually changes something. And when you do that consistently, the cumulative effect over time is significant. Not because each individual choice feels transformative, because the habit of focusing on what you can control, practice daily in small moments, builds a kind of internal steadiness that the person who is constantly fighting the uncontrollable never manages to develop. Now let's talk about where calm is actually built, because this is where most people make a fundamental mistake. They try to find their calm in the middle of the crisis. When the pressure is highest, when the stakes are greatest, when everything is moving fast and the emotional charge is running through every interaction, that is when they try to apply what they've read about staying calm. And it doesn't work. Not reliably. Not at the level they need it to. Because calm is not something you access in a crisis. It is something you build before the crisis arrives, in the moments that don't feel significant enough to pay attention to. The small irritations of daily life. The traffic that makes you 5 minutes late. The plan that changes at the last moment. The colleague who is having a bad day and takes it slightly in your direction. The technology that doesn't work when you need it to. The minor, trivial, entirely forgettable frustrations that arrive in every ordinary day without announcing themselves. Those are the training ground. Every time you encounter one of those moments and choose not to react from full emotional charge, something is being built. Every time you notice the frustration rising and take one breath before responding, the muscle strengthens. Every time you choose the deliberate response over the automatic one in a low-stakes moment, you're preparing for the high-stakes one. Because the nervous system does not distinguish between practice and performance the way the conscious mind does. It learns through repetition. It strengthens through use. The response you practice in small moments is the response that becomes available to you in large ones. The person who has never trained the pause in ordinary life will not suddenly find it in a crisis. But the person who has practiced it 10,000 times in small moments, who has made it their default response in everything from traffic to difficult emails to unexpected changes, that person has access to it when it matters most. Because it is not something they're trying to remember to do. It is something they have become. Before we get to the close, I want to address something honestly. You will lose your calm, even after everything we've talked about today. Even after you start practicing, even after you build the habit, even after it becomes more natural than it used to be. There will be a day when the pressure is too much, the timing is wrong, the history between you and someone else is too loaded, and the reaction happens before the pause has a chance to arrive. That is not failure. That is being human. The measure of how well you have developed this skill is not whether you ever react emotionally. It is how quickly you recover, how fast you return to your center after the wave has passed, how honest you can be with yourself about what happened and what you want to do differently next time. The person who loses their calm and then spends 3 days in shame and self-criticism has not developed more calm. They have just added a new source of disturbance on top of the original one. The person who loses their calm notices it clearly, acknowledges it honestly, and then returns to their practice without excessive drama. That person is doing the actual work because they have learned something the shame spiral never allows you to learn. That the reaction does not define you. Your response to the reaction does. Every time you recover from a loss of composure without making the recovery itself another drama, you are building something. The muscle of return. The ability to find your way back to center quickly. And over time, that muscle becomes as important as the one that helps you avoid the loss of composure in the first place. Because the question was never whether you would face moments that test your calm. That was never a question. The question was always what you would do when they arrived. And what you do when they arrive is a skill. That can be practiced. That gets better with time. That builds into something that starts to feel permanent rather than effortful. That is what this is pointing toward. Not perfection, a direction, a practice, a daily, quiet, unglamorous commitment to becoming someone who is not easily moved by what the world throws at them. That is where the calm lives. That is where your power lives. And once you find it, once you start building it deliberately in ordinary moments, it does not stay small. It grows. It compounds. It becomes the most useful thing you have ever developed. Because no matter what happens around you, if you can govern what happens inside you, nothing can truly derail you. And that is a kind of freedom that very few people ever find. But it is always available to the person willing to practice for it. If this video moved something in you, if something you heard today made you stop and think, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this and subscribe to the channel. There is so much more to explore together. See you in the next one.